At first glance, everything looks quite good. Factories are operating. Car dealerships stamped with new models, and EU officials assure that the future of cars is electric and green. But is it really? New regulations, the Green Deal, and the inevitably approaching ban on combustion engine car sales after 2035 are just the tip of the iceberg of problems facing the automotive industry on the old continent. Beneath beautiful slogans about climate protection lies a brutal reality. Thousands of jobs are disappearing, production costs are rising, and European factories may soon stand empty. In 2024, the European automotive industry announced 104 restructurings, resulting in the elimination of over 88,000 jobs. And remember that the automotive market accounts for 1 trillion euros of European GDP, on which 13 million jobs depend. Meanwhile, in the same game, China and the United States are doing excellently. Chinese electric vehicles are taking markets by storm, while Americans have just freed their market from subsidies, giving consumers choice and the chance for cheaper cars. Will Europe defend its auto sector, or just give it away on a silver plate to the Chinese? Welcome to the 20th report. On January 30th, 2025, the European Union set a deadline for starting open public consultations on the future of the European automotive industry. These lasted until midnight on February 13th and allowed anyone, business entities, non-governmental organizations, or even citizens. One only needed to complete an online questionnaire and reserve an appointment time. No mass influx of citizens concerned about the state of the automotive industry in the EU was recorded in Brussels. In this simple way, the Commission fulfilled its obligation to conduct public consultations and paid bureaucratic homage to liberal democracy. However, in parallel with the public consultations, a strategic dialogue was taking place between the European Commission and representatives of the automotive industry. In a statement announced by the Commission on January 30th, it was reported that, quote, "This dialogue marks the beginning of an inclusive and collaborative process aimed at addressing critical issues facing the automotive sector and ensuring its continued success as a main driver of the European economy." Opening the first day of the strategic dialogue, which unlike democratic consultations is not a token action and is of enormous importance, Ursula von der Leyen promised that the outcome of this dialogue will be a comprehensive action plan, which we will present on March 5th. This action plan will chart a clear course to ensure that our industry can thrive in Europe and compete effectively on the international stage. These words were listened to by representatives of 22 corporations and industry organizations crucial to the automotive industry in the Union. The list of invitees included leading German car manufacturers headed by the Volkswagen Group and BMW, and French Renault. There are key corporations involved in supplying advanced components, spare parts, and technological solutions for the entire industry, such as German ZF Group and Bosch and French Valeo. Interestingly, Volvo, whose majority shareholder is the Chinese corporation Geely, was also included. However, the absence of the American, French, Italian automotive conglomerate Stellantis is conspicuous. Despite having become the owner of brands well known in the old continent, such as Fiat, Lancia, Alfa Romeo, Peugeot, and Citroën. This exclusion of an entity with majority US shareholding, while simultaneously co-opting a Chinese entity, gives pause for thought. From this list, one can discern that the strategic dialogue with the European Commission will involve primarily German corporations accompanied by French ones. Meanwhile, the largest Chinese investor in the automotive industry within the EU has been enabled to follow the progress of discussions in real time. As for practical matters, there has been a division into 4 working groups. The first, tasked with developing a rescue plan for the automotive industry in the field of green transformation, is led by Dutch Commissioner for Climate, Wopke Hoekstra. The second group will address the issue of supply chains and ways to protect domestic industry. It will be headed by the EC Vice President for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy, Frenchman Stéphane Séjourné. Meanwhile, Finnish European Commission Vice President for Technological Sovereignty, Security and Democracy, Hanna Virkkunen, will steer the work of a group dealing with plans to support technological and digital innovations in the automotive industry. The last of the working groups has been assigned to Romanian EC Vice President for Social Rights and Skills, Roxana Minzatu. She will address the social issues in the automotive sector, most likely restructuring plans through employment reduction. The studies prepared by the 4 working groups will serve to arrange a comprehensive action plan for EU structures and member states. This will be directed by EU Commissioner for Transport and Tourism, Apostolos Tzitzikostas from Greece. However, before Commissioner Tzitzikostas announces the rescue plan for the European automotive industry in spring, let's take a closer look at what the game is about and the condition of an economic sector that in official EC documents is called a key driver of European prosperity. According to statistics, it offers approximately 13 million direct and indirect jobs throughout the Union, while the estimate of the GDP value it generates for the community speaks of about 1 trillion euros. Note that the combined gross domestic product of EU countries is around 17 trillion euros. Thus, the thesis of the automotive industry as the most important manufacturing sector for the EU and simultaneously the foundation of the largest economies on the old continent has not been overstated. Meanwhile, according to the European Commission's diagnosis, this industry is currently sinking into a crisis related to high production costs and low profitability of electric vehicle sales. At the same time, manufacturers are unable to adapt to increasingly stringent EU regulations, while consumers in Europe still prefer cars with combustion engines or hybrids due to their lower purchase costs and longer range. Let's remember this diagnosis because we will return to it, as it is not only accurate but also proves that its authors perhaps do not see or do not want to see the fundamental mechanisms of the trap they themselves have built. But for now, let's focus on the first symptoms of collapse. Throughout 2024, companies associated with the automotive industry in the Union announced a total of 104 restructurings. Their main element was job elimination. According to announcements, over 88,000 positions have disappeared or will disappear in the near future. The workers in Germany are feeling this process most strongly. Over 68,000 people there are awaiting layoffs. Then there is a long gap until finally Belgium appears with over 5,000 dismissed individuals. Poland followed with more than 2,800 eliminated jobs. This alone shows that Germany is the epicenter of the automotive crisis on the old continent. The Volkswagen Group, crucial for the German automotive sector, comprising 10 widely known brands, with 114 production plants in 17 European countries and 10 in North and South America, Asia and Africa, cannot count 2024 as a successful year. The corporation originating from Wolfsburg sold 4.8 million cars under the Volkswagen brand in the past year, about 1.4% less than in 2023. The main reason proved to be an 8.3% drop in sales in China. In Europe, sales also fell by 1.8%. The fact that the overall result doesn't look even worse is thanks to the customers from North and South America. There, Volkswagen increased sales by 18.4% and 21% respectively. However, this state of affairs doesn't seem quite so concerning if one considers all 10 brands of Volkswagen. In terms of the number of cars sold in 2024, amounting to 8.5 million units, It remains the world's second largest automotive group after Toyota Motor. Within the corporation, Czech Skoda and Spanish Seat Cupra recorded increased sales. Only Audi and Porsche are performing increasingly poorly. It should also be added that 2023 was the first year for Volkswagen in which it sold more vehicles than in the previous year, after an uninterrupted decline lasting since 2020. Therefore, at first glance, the group's termination of employee guarantees in place for over 30 years, stating that there would never be collective layoffs, might seem an excessive reaction to one difficult year, especially since it caused great public outrage and lively reactions from politicians. The course of negotiations between the group's management and works councils and the IG Metall Trade Union Federation was reported on an ongoing basis in the media. The agreement reached on December 20th was even called a Christmas miracle. It was considered that the elimination of only 35,000 jobs was a great success. As in late October 2024, information appeared that Volkswagen wanted to close 3 German production plants and lay off at least twice as many employees. This would have been an unprecedented event in the entire history of the group. This idea was abandoned, and it ended with a decision to reduce the production capacity of factories in Germany by 734,000 vehicles annually and eliminate some assembly lines. Additionally, the production of the popular Golf will be moved from Germany to Mexico in 2027. Electric models, including the Volkswagen ID.3 and Cupra Born, will take its place. Chancellor Olaf Scholz called such restructuring a good, socially acceptable solution. Meanwhile, the Volkswagen Group is still doing quite well compared to BMW. For this concern, the sales decline compared to 2023 was as much as 4%. The smallest decline affected the BMW brand at -2.3%. The situation for the Mini brand is catastrophic, with a decrease of almost 18%. The only area where the BMW Group is recording sales increases is in electric cars, and by as much as 13.5%. This makes it an anomaly among European manufacturers. Adding to this, let's look at the situation of the third jewel in the crown of German automotive industry, namely Mercedes-Benz Group AG, which specializes in luxury car production. Mercedes electric cars have completely ceased to interest customers, with sales dropping by 23% in 2024. Meanwhile, those powered by combustion engines fell by 3%. The corporation is primarily saved by the fact that Americans consistently love the Mercedes brand, and sales in the USA are growing again. All these sales declines, though not appearing alarming, trigger a chain reaction. Before the end of 2024, there was a flurry of information about restructurings among companies that, while not producing cars themselves, are key components of the automotive industry in the Union, obviously mainly German. Schaeffler, a group specializing in the production of engine components, gearboxes, and rolling bearings, plans to lay off a total of 4,700 employees, of which 2,800 are in Germany. Additionally, it will close one of its plants in Austria and one in the United Kingdom. Following in its footsteps is auto parts supplier Continental, reducing its workforce initially by 5,000 and ultimately by 7,000. In the case of the Bosch Group, negotiations with unions are still ongoing, with talks of collective dismissal covering about 5,500 people, and shortening the work week for 10,000 employees. Meanwhile, auto parts supplier ZF plans to lay off 14,000 of its 54,000 employees in Germany in the coming years. And if the situation doesn't begin to improve, it doesn't rule out relocating its plants outside the European Union. Then there is Germany's largest steel producer, ThyssenKrupp Steel, which announced that over 6 years it will reduce its workforce from 27,000 to just 16,000. And after 2030, it may also definitively leave Germany. This is how poorer sales results in the automotive industry destructively affect successive branches of the economy. To make matters worse, the hope carried by the Chinese market has begun to fade. For years, its growth was seen as a guarantee of greater profits for European car manufacturers. In 2021, investments in production facilities in China accounted for 42% of direct foreign investments from the Union flowing into the Middle Kingdom. And this was mainly capital from German automotive groups. Then, from that year until today, they have recorded a decline in Chinese market share from 24% to just 15%. The rapid downward trend continues despite ongoing enormous investments. Volkswagen sold 1 million fewer cars in China in 2023 than in 2018. This represents a 25% decrease in just 5 years. Luxury car brands Mercedes-Benz and BMW were doing better until recently, achieving record results in 2022. However, afterward, their sales also plummeted in 2024. All this at a time when the Chinese car market grew by about 3%. The whole trouble is that this growth isn't benefiting German or other EU country corporations. This happened because Beijing has consistently focused on supporting the development of electromobility for years, correctly assuming that in the field of combustion-powered cars, the technological advantage of European manufacturers is too great to be easily overcome. China therefore ensured domination over everything necessary for producing an electric-powered vehicle, directing its industrial policy and raw materials policy accordingly. Simultaneously, Chinese automotive corporations specializing in electric car production received generous subsidies, estimated at about $230 billion, transferred to them between 2009 to 2023. As a result, already 2 years ago, half of the electric vehicles used worldwide were driving on Chinese roads. The Middle Kingdom, becoming the largest producer as well as market for electric cars, ensured that it exercised control over all raw materials necessary for their production, including lithium and rare earth elements. At the same time, it also controls the supply chains of components necessary for them. Chinese corporations led by CATL and BYD have dominated the global battery market. In this way, in the most important areas, the People's Republic of China has provided its corporations with overwhelming advantage over competitors from Europe. In this set of assets, the proverbial cherry on the top became the development of innovative software for Chinese electric cars. Working for the think tank Merix, analysts Wendy Cheng and Antonia Ahmaidi in an August 2024 study described the advantage achieved in this field with the following words: Chinese electric vehicles are vehicles with artificial intelligence on wheels, while European cars are still trying to become intelligent. Car manufacturers from Europe understood too late that an electric car essentially consists of only 3 important components: software plus battery plus vehicle floor platform, which allows technology companies to enter this industry and quickly create new cars. As Chang and Maidi emphasize, while an internal combustion engine typically has hundreds of moving parts, an electric motor typically has 2. Therefore, electric vehicles can be seen as a more manageable technology, especially in terms of mechanics, since most of the complexity concerns batteries or electronics. Moreover, it is easier to transform it quickly because, for example, introducing a new battery often does not require changing the engine. The magnitude of China's success, which has evidently outplayed car corporations from Europe and the governments behind them, can only be appreciated when we learn that the European automotive sector is the largest investor in the Union in research and development. It has allocated over 72 billion euros annually to this purpose in recent years. This constitutes as much as 33% of the total such expenditures in the EU. While Japanese companies spent about 32 billion euros, American 23 billion, and Chinese just over 14 billion. But European corporations were still perfecting drive elements and combustion engines not batteries or software. Chinese automotive companies allocating much smaller amounts to research invested in what was considered the technology of the future. Meanwhile, old continent corporations were perfecting technologies of the past, which incidentally the European Commission officially decreed, but more on that in a moment. Observers watching this phenomenon had no doubt several years ago where it would lead. Quote, "After the new generation of Chinese electric vehicles launches, the next country to face us will be not the United States, but Germany, because we will likely take over a significant portion of German car manufacturers' market share," announced one of the most prominent Chinese economists, director of the Chinese Center for Economic Research, Professor Yao Yang, in September 2022. After 3 years, we are witnessing his forecast coming true. Chinese automotive corporations such as BYD, Geely, and SAIC Motor produce electric cars that are cheaper, more saturated with electronics, and possessing much better software than those produced by German and French corporations. They are therefore quickly displacing them from the Chinese market, while simultaneously trying to push into Europe and do exactly the same there. According to Professor Ferdinand Dudenhofer, director of Car Center Automotive Research, the order portfolio in the German automotive industry for 2025 is the lowest in 10 years. All this creates additional elements of the trap that has begun to close around the automotive industry in Europe. To fully understand what this trap is about and why, as noted at the beginning of this material, the European Commission has so far seemed completely indifferent to noticing it, let's go back in time about 120 years, when electric cars had to compete with those powered by internal combustion engines, according to rules imposed by the free market. In the 1890s, electric vehicles were structurally far superior to combustion automobiles. They were quiet, easier to steer, safe, drove without vibrations, and didn't pollute the air with exhaust fumes. Thanks to the electric motor, they achieved better acceleration and could also drive in reverse without needing a reverse gear. All these advantages were reduced by one flaw: the power source, which was lead-acid battery, designed in 1853 by French physicist Gaston Plante, and subsequently improved by engineer Camille Faure. Many designers believed that they would find a remedy for this imperfection. One of them, Louis-Antoine Krieger, established an electric car factory in Paris in 1894. His two-seater, elegant electric carriages delighted the wealthy and aristocrats. Constantly improved, by 1901 they could travel approximately 190 kilometers on a single charge. However, charging took many hours. In the USA, Walter C. Baker, together with Fred White, launched a factory producing electric cars in 1897. Baker's first racing car was his electric torpedo from 1902. Under the streamlined body was a simple platform chassis with seats for 2 people and a 14-horsepower Elwell Parker electric motor. Around them were arranged 40 lead-acid batteries that supplied power. The Baker Motor Vehicle Company also offered luxury electric vehicles to millionaires, politicians, and crowned heads. For an additional fee, they were adapted to individual tastes. For the King of Siam, a car was trimmed with ivory and gold. When the White House decided that President Theodore Roosevelt should switch from a carriage to a car, after testing various offers, automobiles with combustion engines were rejected in favor of Baker Motor Vehicle products. This wasn't the only thing that promised a bright future for electric cars in America. At that time, of the 2 million miles of roads connecting cities in the USA, paved surfaces were laid on only 160 miles. People between towns were transported by trains or stagecoaches. For cars, the streets of large cities remained, and on short routes, electric cars performed excellently. That's why at the beginning of the 20th century, for every 10 cars produced in the USA, as many as 4 were powered by electric motors. In the record year of 1906, for Baker Motor Vehicle, the company sold 800 electric vehicles. At the same time, it was closely followed by another company producing this type of vehicle, the Riker Electric Vehicle Company, founded by the capable inventor Andrew Riker. It was Riker who came up with the idea of standardizing batteries. Unifying dimensions and key elements allowed for the opening of the first battery exchange points. An electric vehicle driver could immediately replace the power source and then continue driving. So when in 1904, Thomas Edison announced that in his laboratory in West Orange they had built a battery in which lead plates were replaced with lighter nickel ones, electric car manufacturers were euphoric. Edison's nickel-iron batteries were characterized by greater electrical capacity. Combined with a reliable motor, they seemed to guarantee inevitable success. Other events also heralded it. At the end of the 19th century, journalists from the daily Le Figaro came up with the idea of speed competitions on a road near Acher. Cars accelerated and covered a kilometer-long section at full speed. The organizers measured the time. The competitions were dominated by electric vehicles of two designers, Charles Jantot and Belgian Émile Genatsy. The vehicles they built broke successive world records, leaving combustion automobiles far behind. The electric vehicle Je me contente, constructed by Genatsy, was the first in history to travel at a speed of over 100 km per hour. The Belgian built a visionary marvel. The vehicle's body was cast from aluminum and tungsten, and the whole body was given an aerodynamic cigar shape. Pneumatic tires protected the electric vehicle from shocks. On May 1, 1899, it accelerated to 106 km per hour. But after loading the batteries, Je me contente could travel at most only a dozen or so kilometers. Not unlike was the case with the Walter C. Baker's Torpedo, which in 1902 sped at around 121 km an hour at subsequent shows in the USA. These performance figures, which users of combustion cars could not yet dream of at that time, did not replace everyday utility and convenience. In electric vehicles weighing almost 2 tons, the suspension often broke down, and intensively used batteries became unusable after half a year. Edison's nickel-iron cells did not fulfill the hopes placed in them. They wore out just as quickly as the classic battery and proved much more expensive. Meanwhile, the combustion engine, although it emitted stinking smoke, made a noise and often broke down, had one fundamental advantage. It was powered by fuel that could be easily poured into the tank. This alone meant that in prestigious rallies, once the distance was extended, electric vehicles always lost, despite their excellent acceleration. Besides, automobiles were becoming more perfect with each passing year. Thanks to Robert Bosch's ignition system, the combustion engine achieved increasingly higher revolutions. The gearbox designed by Louis Renault allowed for climbing steep hills, accelerating faster, and also driving in reverse. In 1899, the largest producer of electric vehicles in Europe, the aforementioned Krieger's company, could boast sales of only about 60 cars per year. This paled in comparison to Karl Benz's largest combustion-powered car factory, which found buyers for about 600 cars annually. In the USA, leading electric vehicle manufacturers sold about 1,300 vehicles in 1900. Over the following years, electric vehicles lost market share even where they received support. In New York and London, attempts were made to base public transport on electric buses. However, they proved too unreliable. The final blow to electromobility was dealt by Henry Ford, introducing his Model T for sale in 1908. Weighing just 540 kilograms, the car performed excellently on bumpy roads and reached a speed of 65 km per hour. Moreover, it cost only $850. Thanks to assembly line production in 1914, The assembly of one Model T at Ford's factory in Detroit took 93 minutes. With such a competitor in the free market, electric vehicles had to lose. Although at the peak of their popularity, at the beginning of the 20th century, as many as 34,000 such vehicles were driving on American roads. Three things most important to the mass consumer decided: utility, price, and durability. In each of these categories, cars with combustion engines proved better. And now let's recall the diagnosis by the European Commission, which has already been quoted here, namely, consumers in Europe still prefer car models with combustion engines or hybrids due to their lower purchase cost and longer range. Looking at the issue from this perspective, that of consumer choices, Germany again serves as an excellent laboratory. A year has passed since the Berlin government eliminated the subsidy package for battery-powered car sales. Under this program, the buyer received a 4,500 euros state subsidy when purchasing a car, and the manufacturer received 2,250 euros. When the support disappeared, the free market spoke, and the Germans bought 27.4% fewer electric cars than in 2023. For this reason, the share of new vehicles of this type in the German market quickly fell from just under 16 to 13.5%. This doesn't mean consumers stopped dreaming about their own four wheels. On the contrary, during the same period, sales of hybrid-powered cars increased by 12.7%, plug-in hybrids by 9.2%. However, Germans still most willingly purchased classic cars with gasoline engines. Their share of the entire market was over 35%, and sales increased by 1.4%. Almost as badly as electric vehicles, though not quite as badly, are cars with diesel engines in Germany. Their sales decreased by 17.2%. Similar changes occurred in the second largest automotive market in the Union, France. Subsidies for electric car purchases have been progressively reduced there for 2 years, and are ultimately set to fall from 7,000 euros to 4,000 euros. The effects are already visible. Sales of vehicles powered solely by batteries fell in 2024 by as much as 21%. At the same time as in Germany, the number of newly registered hybrid-powered cars increased dramatically, especially plug-in types by as much as 46%. In Italy, the third European market, the decline in electric car sales was not as dramatic, amounting to 2%. However, unlike Germans and French, Italians generally are very reluctant to buy cars powered solely by batteries, and their share in the entire automotive market in Italy is a modest 4.2%. In more general terms, the entire automotive market in Europe is proving unfavorable for electric vehicles. Their share in the pool of newly registered cars grew rapidly until 2022, reaching around 15%. From that moment, stagnation began, which in 2024 turned into a decline. Let's look at how this relates to global trends. In 2024, 17.1 million new vehicles powered solely by batteries found buyers worldwide. This represents a sales increase of 25% compared to the previous year. However, of this pool, as many as 11 million electric vehicles were purchased in China. There, a sales increase of up to 40% was recorded. Meanwhile, the combined markets of European Union countries, EFTA and the United Kingdom have completely lost their enthusiasm for this type of a vehicle. Only 3 million electric vehicles were sold there in 2024, which meant an overall sales decrease of 3%. The third major player, the combined US and Canada market, absorbed 1.8 million electric vehicles, representing a 9% sales increase in 2024. However, all indications are that the current year will be much more symptomatic for electric cars in the United States regarding their future. This is discussed in a report by the information analysis service Raw Motion, quoted by Reuters at the beginning of 2025. It emphasized that in North America, 9% growth can be attributed mainly to consumer subsidies. Meanwhile, the elimination of subsidies in Germany had a devastating impact on the entire European market. If the US follows suit, we may see the same. Shortly after the report was released, on his inauguration day, Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Unleashing American Energy. It orders federal agencies to immediately suspend the payment of funds allocated by Congress during Joe Biden's administration to subsidize electric cars. These were included in the Inflation Reduction Act package to guarantee multi-billion-dollar subsidies for companies investing in electric vehicle production and provide tax credits of up to $7,500 for buyers of new electric vehicles and $4,000 for buyers of used models. At the same time, Trump cancelled Biden's executive order, requiring that by 2030, 50% of new vehicles sold in the US would be battery-powered cars, plug-in hybrids, or hydrogen-powered vehicles. Although Trump's actions may result in a series of lawsuits filed by beneficiaries of the previous administration's policies, this won't change the fact that the coherent system of subsidizing electric vehicles is being dismantled in the United States. Soon it will become apparent whether, as a result, consumers will return away from them, just as in Germany and France. Looking back at Europe, let's examine the global automotive transformation process. We are witnessing a fascinating change occurring before our eyes in three key global economic areas. In China, under the communist government's aegis, a comprehensive system was created to gradually push liquid fuel-burning cars out of the consumer market in favor of battery-powered vehicles. Since the Middle Kingdom is condemned to import oil due to the lack of direct access to large deposits, these actions make profound strategic sense. They strengthen the state's resilience to potential supply disruptions, extremely important given the escalating conflict with the United States. Simultaneously, Beijing decided to extract maximum benefits from this enormously costly transformation. For years, it has tried to monopolize access to necessary raw materials, similarly with the battery market and software for these vehicles. These actions were supplemented by a fiscal subsidy system, making it profitable for Chinese automotive corporations to invest in electric car production and improvement, and for consumers to purchase them. Manufacturers also await an additional bonus: the chance to take from European companies something that guaranteed their excellence, namely a key position in the global automotive market. Looking at the ranking of corporations with the highest revenues, thus obtaining the most cash from consumers, we see that in 2024, the first position was still held by Volkswagen. The next places are Toyota, Stellantis, Mercedes-Benz, and Ford. Only in 10th place does the first Chinese corporation appear, BYD, with revenue of $24.5 billion, despite the company recording record sales growth month by month. Decades of production facility expansion, sales networks, marketing, and consumer trust building result in an invaluable advantage over new competitors. And this is priceless in a market whose global value is estimated at $4 trillion, and in about a decade may be worth over $6.5 trillion US. But Chinese automotive corporations, thanks to their innovation, have gained an advantage in electric cars. This proves decisive in China because with the government's support, there is a successive elimination of combustion-powered car sales, where European firms had an enormous technological advantage. They are thus definitively losing this market, crucial for their future development. Revenues are transferring to Chinese hands, enabling the next step in expansion, reaching for the great prize that is the European market, previously inaccessible to them. At the same time, transformation in the USA is beginning to take a completely different path. After Donald Trump's decision, the possibility opens for equal competition for consumer favor among all types of vehicles. A year of such possibility in Germany brought information that all kinds of hybrid cars benefit the most. They combine the advantages of combustion and electric-powered cars. If we observe similar behaviors in the United States, then hybrid technology development may become a priority for local producers and all automotive corporations wishing to gain access to Americans' wallets. Meanwhile, just as 120 years ago, battery-powered cars, due to their lesser utility, will begin to be displaced from the market. Note also that President Trump announced plans to introduce tariffs on foreign cars from April 2025, including 25% on European cars. Looking back at the old continent, events are following a completely different path than in China and the USA. And for its automotive industry, American tariffs may prove to be another painful blow and yet another element of the closing trap. It's high time, as promised at the beginning of this material, to describe its mechanisms in more detail and say why it is closing now. At the end of 2019, the European Commission announced an action plan called the European Green Deal. The attempt to halt climate change was combined with a definitive move away from fossil fuels. One of the key elements of this plan became the development of electromobility. In June 2025, government representatives in the European Council accepted the EC's proposals. They imposed on the Union a package of regulations that makes it impossible to register new passenger and delivery cars that emit greenhouse gases from 2035. De facto, that means that car manufacturers will only be able to sell vehicles powered by batteries or hydrogen. The only exception was made for niche luxury cars and those powered by synthetic fuel. This decision was accepted by the European Parliament in its vote in mid-February 2023. To further force automotive corporations to switch to electric vehicle production during the transition period, on April 12, 2024, the Council of the European Union adopted the Euro 7 regulation, replacing the previous Euro 6, which already set very stringent emission standards for fossil fuel engines. Although pressure from the automotive lobby meant that these were not further tightened, maximum emission standards were added for tire wear and during braking, as well as requirements for battery durability. Changes in regulations will generate additional car production costs, which in turn will translate into their final price for consumers. However, this is a trifle compared to the effects of the CAFE, Clean Air for Europe regulation, coming into force from January 1, 2025. It tightens the CO2 emission standard for new passenger cars from the current level of 95 to 93.6 kilograms per kilometer traveled. Moreover, this will be calculated based on the restrictive, close to reality WLTP standard. This detail means that while until January 1st, 2025, the average car was calculated to emit 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer, in the new system the same car will be calculated to emit 115 grams of CO2 per kilometer. Therefore, it looks like even cars meeting Euro 7 standards will still emit an average of 20 grams more carbon dioxide than specified as the permissible limit. Meanwhile, for each exceeded gram, a penalty of 95 euros is provided. This means a potential penalty of up to 2,000 euros imposed by the European Union on the manufacturer for a single car. The system was designed as an additional incentive to increase electric car production, as emissions trading is possible. And since electric vehicles don't emit CO2, they lower the average emissions of cars produced by a given corporation. When a company sells more than 20% electric vehicles in its production pool on the EU market, it then avoids having to pay penalties for combustion vehicles. In this regulatory concept, considered by Brussels bureaucrats to be excellent, a dangerous gap appeared at the moment of its implementation. They completely failed to take into account that European consumers would not want to buy electric vehicles en masse, so that they would constitute over 20% of the total sales volume. A single glance at the map showing how this volume is distributed across EU countries would have sufficed. They would then have seen that implementing such a plan is really only possible in Scandinavia and Benelux countries. Everywhere else, even before the significant sales declines in 2024, European corporations had no chance of meeting the assumptions of the CAFE regulation. This threatens them with the necessity of paying penalties amounting to many billions of euros. The effects of the new regulations were not long in coming. On January 17th, the Financial Times reported from Brussels that analysts estimate that some European automotive groups may be forced to purchase carbon dioxide emissions allowances worth hundreds of millions of euros from Chinese rivals such as BYD, which has one of the largest pools of allowances for resale, thanks to large sales of electric vehicles in the EU. Another beneficiary turns out to be Elon Musk's Tesla. As FT writes, the American electric vehicle manufacturer has already earned over $2 billion in the first 9 months of last year, selling credits to emission systems worldwide. The main donors transferring funds to Chinese corporations and Tesla will be brands such as Volkswagen, Renault, Stellantis, and Mercedes-Benz. They may have no choice because, according to FT calculations, paying CAFE penalties could cost the Volkswagen Group 6 billion euros and Renault 1.5 billion euros. And so the CAFE directive becomes an element completing the trap in which the European automotive industry finds itself. Let's list its key elements. European Union countries essentially behaved rationally. Like China, they do not have their own oil deposits, and years ago gave up trying to guarantee themselves secure access through military or political means. Reducing dependence on liquid fuels is therefore strategically necessary. However, while promoting electromobility, unlike the Middle Kingdom, they neither ensured access to strategic raw material deposits, nor self-sufficiency in battery production, nor even the development of software for electric vehicles. As a result, to the dependence on oil, impossible to overcome in a short time, was added dependence on rare earth elements, graphite and lithium, for the development of key industry branch. Meanwhile, China remains the main distributor of these resources. The same applies to batteries. Only recently have desperate attempts begun to secure access to key raw material deposits for the EU and build a battery industry in Europe. Similar mistakes were made in organizing the entire transformation. Only now, following Chancellor Olaf Scholz's proposal, has the European Commission begun planning an EU-wide system of subsidies for electric cars. Here, the delay compared to China's actions amounts to an entire decade. Worse still, Beijing investing in coal-fired power plants in the energy system as an inexpensive power supplement for renewable energy sources provides consumers with electricity 3 to 4 times cheaper than in Europe, thus creating an additional incentive to purchase electric vehicles. During this time, automotive corporations from the old continent, inefficiently investing resources in research and development despite their might, began rapidly losing shares in the Chinese market, losing competition in the field of electromobility to Chinese manufacturers and Tesla. The costs of this failure were deepened by EU regulations designed to force companies to invest in electromobility. Another cost was added by consumers collectively refusing to buy electric vehicles in Europe without generous subsidies. This unwittingly increased the amount of penalties threatening manufacturers under CAFE. From this nightmarish entanglement of the Union in successive regulations, which, while aiming to strengthen a key branch of the economy, actually successively weakens it, the Chinese are again trying to benefit. Thus, Reuters reported on January 16, 2025 that Chinese officials and car manufacturers are looking at German factories slated for closure and are particularly interested in Volkswagen plants, and added, car production in Germany for sale in Europe would allow Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers to avoid paying EU tariffs on electric cars imported from China, and could also pose an additional threat to the competitiveness of European manufacturers. Factories in Dresden and Osnabrück could go under the hammer. This would allow Volkswagen to reduce the costs of the Christmas agreement with trade unions. At the same time, many Chinese car manufacturers are looking for locations for their plants in Europe. Therefore, tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles introduced in autumn 2024 will give EU producers only temporary protection. Meanwhile, American tariffs await them. Moreover, automotive corporations from the US, like the Trump administration itself, do not intend to offer any advantage to European competitors. So when we look holistically at the trap closing around the European automotive industry, it increasingly brings to mind the image of several giant mammoths driven into a closed valley and surrounded by a group of agile hunters armed with very sharp tools. The old mammoths are still large and strong, but this no longer changes the fact that they are in a terrible position. This creates an opportunity for corporations from China and the US, as well as Japanese and South Korean ones, to hunt very abundantly. And the European Union has done absolutely everything to drive its own mammoths deeper into this dark valley, although it still possesses tools that could help them escape from this predicament. The optimal decision seems to be following in Donald Trump's footsteps and eliminating all preferences for battery-powered cars, abandoning subsidies, and liberating the free market. Examples from Germany and France indicate that hybrid cars would then receive a great opportunity for development, offering the possibility of perfecting design solutions, reducing CO2 emissions and fossil fuel consumption, while simultaneously less dependence on strategic raw materials necessary for electromobility and battery manufacturers. In this field, European automotive corporations would also have a greater chance of effectively competing with Chinese and American manufacturers. However, the European Commission's enormous attachment to the Green Deal assumptions, the development vision that the German government has so far honored, the great desire to maintain a presence in the Chinese market shown by German corporations, which requires investing in electric vehicles, existing EU directives and standards. All this together constitutes a very durable obstacle. It blocks a radical turn in current policy. It would also have to lead to the definitive abandonment of the ban on selling new cars emitting CO2 after 2035. Though this would be an action in line with the recently very fashionable postulate of a return to common sense. All the aforementioned obstacles mean, however, that the result of the strategic dialogue between European Commission and representatives of the automotive industry may become an attempt to build a comprehensive system promoting electromobility, very similar to the Chinese one, therefore requiring hundreds of billions of euros to be spent by 2035, all in the name of saving the planet and the automotive sector, which currently generates 384 billion euros in tax revenue for European governments and guarantees the Union a trade surplus of 107 billion euros. Thus, allowing it to collapse is not an option. However, if the Union chooses to replicate Chinese patterns, it should be expected that the bloody hunt for mammoths will only be somewhat delayed.